Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Seattle Subway's Mayoral Candidate Forum. My name is Rachel Brown, and I am a board member and the campaigns director with Seattle Subway. We're really excited to be hosting our first ever forum for any election this evening. And for those of you who don't know, we are an all-volunteer nonprofit advocating to connect all Seattle neighborhoods as well as our region via reliable, renewable, high capacity transit. Tonight, we are expecting 7 of Seattle's candidates for mayor who will answer some questions from our moderator, Erica C. Barnett. And we will also be live streaming this event on our Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube pages, as well as the Seattle Transit blog. And we'll be putting a link in the chat if you'd like to see those recordings after tonight's forum. We are hoping to stick to an hour tonight so everyone can get out and enjoy the lovely evening. And without further ado, I will introduce our moderator. Erica C. Barnett is a longtime journalist covering local news and politics in Seattle. After a career in weekly newspapers, she co-founded the website Publicola in 2009, and she is now its publisher and editor. Her memoir, Quitter, was published by Viking in 2020. And just a little bit about the format, we're focusing our questions on mass transit access and expansion across the city. Many of the participants this evening submitted questions and we tried to include as many as we could. So we're gonna start with asking the candidates some open-ended questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. And then we're also gonna be interspersing the open-ended questions with some lightning round style questions, just a yes, no. So I will turn it over to Erica. Thanks so much, everyone.
Well, good evening, and thank you to all the candidates for being here tonight to talk about transportation, development, and equity in our city. I'm honored to be here hosting this event. And as Rachel said, we're going to start with some open-ended questions, which were written in advance by the forum co-sponsors and members of the public. Since we only have an hour, we're going to forego introductions and jump right into the questions. And you will have 60 seconds to answer each question. I apologize in advance for cutting you off if you are not able to adhere to that very brief time limit. But you can see the timer in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, at least that's where it is on my screen, and that'll give you an indication of how long you have to respond. The first question will, actually, let me introduce all the candidates who are here with us tonight. First, we have Colleen Echohawk, Jessen Farrell, Lorena Gonzalez, Bruce Harrell, Andrew Grant Houston, Casey Sixkiller, and Lance Randall. And our first question will go first to Colleen Echohawk. What do you see as the greatest obstacle for Seattle to connect most of its urban villages with a robust rapid transit system, like the system in the Washington, D.C. metro area or systems in Europe or Asia?
All right. Well, thank you so much for the question and for having me tonight, Erica. I think the biggest issue we have right now is buses. I don't think we have enough buses to connect us to the places that we need to get to for light rail. I'll give you an example. I am really honored to live in the North End. I have a really great group of neighbors that I live with and live next to. And it is hard. It's going to be hard for us to get to the North Gate light rail station. I'm excited about it. I think about it every day, but I'm also thinking about how I'm going to be able to connect that. So I think that what is exciting for me moving forward is seeing more buses and getting people excited about what transit should mean for our city as we move towards a city like Tokyo. I think that our bus system is wonderful. I ride the E-Line, the Prior 358, and I look forward to getting more people on buses.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Jessen Farrell.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting us tonight and for all of you who are watching at home or maybe in the park. I'm Jessen Farrell, and you know what I would say as far as this answer goes is it is just a matter of priority. We know what works. We know even how to raise our taxes to make sure that we have the buses and the light rail and the great walking and biking infrastructure that we need. But it is really just a matter of turning words into action. And that's what I've been doing my entire career as the executive director of Transportation Choices Coalition and as a legislator. And, you know, this is really a moment where we need to go big. I'm really excited about the transportation platform that we are running on, 100 miles of new bus lanes, in addition to a whole variety of other things. But at the end of the day, we need to prioritize investments in building a transit-rich city.
Thank you. The next, this question will go next to Lorena Gonzalez.
Thanks, Erica, and thanks to the folks over at Seattle Subway for organizing this event for this very hot evening. I think the greatest obstacle for Seattle to connect most of its urban villages is the fact that we don't have enough density to create the connective tissue that is necessary to have our urban villages feed into each other. So we know that we have a set number of urban villages. They are in sort of disparate pockets, and they're a little bit of an island within areas that are primarily single family zones, with the exception of our industrial maritime land where there is no urban villages. And so I think the reality is that we're going to continue to have connectivity. We can have all the buses in the world, we can have all the light rail in the world, but if we are still requiring people to who primarily rely on transit to live only in urban villages, because that's the only place we have multifamily housing, then we're going to continue to experience an obstacle in this area.
Thank you. Bruce Harrell is next.
Thank you. Well, specifically in Seattle's footprint, I think we have topology and geology issues that are unique to Seattle. And when I talk about whether we will be above grade or below grade in certain areas, that we certainly have unique challenges because of Ballard's needs, as an example, West Seattle needs, as an example. So when we look at our 25-year plan, we're going to have to do really a deep dive with communities and looking at where commuters and those users of our transportation systems, all systems, what's most important. So that's going to be a robust process. I also think because, as I've talked about in other forums, we are competing with other cities, whether it's Everett or Tacoma or Bellevue, and we're competing for jobs, we're competing for employees. And so our relationships are making sure we meet our unique needs as the largest city and the biggest economic driver in the state are heard, that we work those relationships incredibly well.
Thanks. And next we go to Andrew Grant Houston.
So I would say the biggest thing in my mind really comes down to will. And a big part of that is why I'm running. We had a mayor that had committed to be a transit champion and said that she would be the first climate mayor, and has repeatedly tried to stall or defund our streetcar connection, the Center City connector, as well as has continued to kick the can on the Graham Street station, which was committed to the South End in that community a long time ago. And so we know what we have to do. We know where the funding can come from and what needs the steps in order to execute. And so it's really about having the right kind of executive to actually lead on these types of issues.
Thank you. Next, we have Lance Randall.
Yeah, I think there are two things that we need to take a look at. Number one is making sure we prioritize any type of maintenance and improvements for safety in the areas that need it to have the most. That will pretty much determine the amount of investments that we can make in expanding mass transportation, because if we can make it safe for people, they will use it more. So we need to make sure we take a look at the adjustments that we're going to have to make, because we did get hit pretty hard with COVID, and then prioritize what communities really need to have upgrades when it comes to technology and traffic signals and what have you. And then just trying to make sure that we continue to get the investments that we need to continue to expand access to mass transportation. I think north and south is pretty good, but east and west is a challenge. And we have to make sure we figure out the right areas that we can go through in order to navigate, to make sure that whatever improvements we put in place are going to be safe and people will use those.
And finally, Casey Sixkiller.
Well, thanks. It's a great question. I think it's important for us to start by, just remembering that this is a heavy transit user city and region. And there's a reason for that, we've been investing in transportation and transit infrastructure for a long time here. And if you look north and south and east and west, you literally see a regional transit system, a light rail system coming to life before your eyes. And we have a number of light rail stations opening this year and then additional stations every year for the next 4 years. That's transformational, not just in terms of mobility around the city, but it now gives us a chance to work with the county and begin the rerouting process and making sure we're doing those last mile connections to transit across the city. And I think it's really important for us to really center on those areas that we know do not have the kind of mobility and access to frequent and reliable service. South Seattle is a really good example of that. So we have a system coming up. I think it's something for us to be excited about, but now we get to focus on how we connect more people to it.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for keeping to time. I know this is a really short time to answer these questions. So I appreciate your courtesy on that. Next question is about rail. The city doesn't have its own long-term vision specifically for rail. From your perspective, what are some of the benefits of creating a long-term rail expansion plan at the city level and implementing a citywide rail network on our own? Well, for this one, we'll start with Jess and Farrell.
Thank you so much. This is a really important question. I have been a champion of both heavy and light rail my entire career, whether it's pushing WashDOT to plan or getting Sound Transit 2 passed and writing the legislation for Sound Transit 3. Rail is something that's really important to me. And it is important for Seattle to lead the way on this, quite simply. We are the biggest transit market in the state. I mean, it's also great to point out that Bellevue is a very large transit market as well. But we are the largest transit market in the state. And one of the things that we can do is push others and show others the way, particularly on this issue. So being able to lead the way in terms of showing the next generation of both heavy and light rail investments is important, but pushing the region to continue to keep Sound Transit on track, even in spite of financial difficulties. We need to be the leader on this issue simply because of where we are, our density, et cetera.
Thank you. Next, Lorena Gonzalez.
I'm already starting to memorize the order here. So
yep, it's going to stay the same every time.
You know, I know that this is a priority issue for the volunteers and members of Seattle Subway. I've had an opportunity to meet with several of you to talk about your vision around creating a long-term rail expansion plan that is Seattle specific. And, you know, and I also know that you all engage in advocacy at the state level to allow for the legal authority for us to be able to do that work. When folks from Seattle Subway, I think it was Ben, emailed my office to say, hey, can you weigh in favor of this plan? I willingly did that in order to signal to the state that I think it's important for localities to be in a position to have the planning tools that we need to plan to meet the needs of our own residents as it relates to transit. So I will continue to be supportive of that if elected mayor.
Thank you. Next, Bruce Harrell.
So, because we know, I'll use West Seattle and Ballard as examples, because we know they need light rail, that we know our unique needs of a city, that I am very intrigued, I should say, by having more local control. When we look at how SC3 is going to be funded through a sales tax and an MVET and through property taxes, realizing again, we are the largest city of the cities where light rail will expand. I am a strong proponent of more local control. And the reason I share a little bit of reticence is only because the numbers, again, as said by some of the other speakers, the numbers on what we are generating, that we are working collaboratively. We are working as a region-wide system. So before we have the discussion we had years ago with the monorail system as an example, and became a little too Seattle-centric, I think we need to look at the numbers and see if we can somehow gain more control, but still look at the regional play.
Thank you. Andrew Grant Houston.
Yep, so I agree with this, that we need to update our transportation master plan. It's a reason why a multimodal master plan is one of my policy points underneath my plan to revision 0 and get to reduce the number of traffic deaths that we have. Is that in order to do so, we actually need to move people to safer modes of transportation, and that includes light rail. As someone who designed my own map of what it could look like in the future of sustainable transit in Seattle, what I really was focused on in that map, and what I believe should be our focus, is really making sure that everyone is within a short distance of a light rail station. And when you do that, when you actually plan for that kind of system, what you are telling community is, it doesn't matter where you live in the city, you are going to be a part of the system and you're going to be able to benefit from this in the future. We need to have that future kind of planning, and the data is already there. So let's just do it.
Thank you. Next is Lance Randall.
Yeah, I think the good thing about having a long-term vision locally based is that we can also pay attention to what is being developed around the link rail corridors. Down in Southeast, the one thing that I've noticed is that you still have businesses that are still struggling, trying to recover from the fact that the link rail is coming through and there's not enough investment that has been going in those communities, especially the businesses that surround the link rail. So when you have local control of doing something like this, not only do you plan the link rail, but you also plan on how you're going to minimize the impacts around your construction and how you can provide benefits for the businesses. And you can also have target investments, not just for the link rail, but target investments for the small businesses along the link rail, and also make investments in getting people access to be able to get to the link rail station so they can use the transportation.
Thank you. Next, Casey Sixkiller.
Well, I think it's number one, the best way for us to preserve options to expand rail in the future is to deliver ST3. And obviously there's a very big conversation going on right now about whether or not we can, or what parts and what time frame we'll actually deliver that plan. And obviously the mayor is a member of, but not the dictator of, the Sound Transit Board. And it requires us to work together as a region. We're building a regional system. And I agree. We need to continue to do as much as we can to move folks in and through and up and down through Seattle. But Seattle also is an economic center, it's a job center. We need to create opportunities for people to come into the city, get out of their cars, ride light rail, ride buses, express transit, or even heavy rail. Yeah, and I think doing that requires us to have a regional approach, not a go at Seattle alone approach. And so, but the best way for us to move forward is to actually deliver that ST3 plan, build that line from West Seattle to Ballard, and then move beyond that.
Thanks. And finally, Colleen Echohawk.
Thank you so much for the question. And I think the first thing I want to say is that I would absolutely be looking forward to meeting with some of you all to find out what you think and how we think we should move this forward, because I am always going to be ready to talk about transit. I'm always going to be ready to be thinking about how we make it easier to get people on transit, off transit, to get to the places that they need to go as soon as possible. So yes, I do think we need a long-term plan, because transit should be thought of as a utility. Some of the benefits of a long-term plan, I think, would be more and of rail all over the city is more transportation to the neighborhoods, making it easier for people to get in and out to the groceries, to the hospital, whatever you need to be doing, connecting to the bigger system. I can't wait for the time when I can easily get to Everett on light rail and visit my friends and relatives out there. And then also just getting people out of cars. We have to have that vision of having people making it as accessible as possible and getting people out of cars.
Thank you. Our next question is about the Move Seattle levy. And it's a simple one. Where did the Move Seattle levy go wrong? And how would you design the Move Seattle levy renewal for the 2024 ballot? And we'll start with Lorena Gonzalez.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure.
I didn't quite get the last part.
Where did the Move Seattle levy go wrong? And how would you design the Move Seattle levy renewal for the 2024 election?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, Erica. I think that the Move Seattle levy continues to be critically important investments. When we first considered passing Move Seattle levy, I was a strong supporter of it. I do think that, unfortunately, what I'm concerned about is that SDOT had too many priorities, which meant nothing became a priority. And I think there's an opportunity for the next mayor to laser focus SDOT on completion of some of these important promised projects. So for 2024, I've talked about this before, I think there will be a need to structure a levy that both addresses some of the backfill needs of projects that were not effectively completed at the time that we're asking the voters to renew it, in addition to supplementing and identifying new investments. The reality is that there is a huge scale of need for investment in this space. And I think that a good case could be made to the voters as to why they should continue to support these investments.
Thank you. Next, Bruce Harrell.
Well, certainly a lot of the deliverables were just not delivered on time or as promised, whether it's the rapid ride bus lines or some of the paved streets or some of the other deliverables. I think that, again, under my initiative, when I talk about opening up the data and making sure that all of our capital improvements and our future levies are completely transparent to the public, such that they can see the costs at a granular level, but not only can they see the cost, but they can help us data mine and reconfigure and help the city get smarter on some of our how we price our major projects. So I think we've lost to some extent the kind of trust we want when we look at funding Sound Transit 3, when we look at any of our levies, whether it's a parks levy, a libraries levy, we have to open up the data to earn the trust. And I think that's gonna be critically important on our transportation projects. And we lost that.
Thanks. Next, Andrew Grant Houston.
So again, the data is already there. So there is an annual update that comes out for the Move Seattle levy as to what projects are completed, which ones are not, which ones are getting delayed. I read it every single year so that I know what to advocate for, because I advocate with other groups, and this is what we try and argue for every single year in the budget. It's something where the levy has become or has fallen short of what its expectations were, mainly because of the executive. The executive likes to take money from the Move Seattle levy and use it for other things that are related to transportation, which is a very large category. And so it's really easy to say, oh, we're just going to take $1 million here, we're going to take $1 million there. And then suddenly bike lanes that were supposed to be done in 2020 just disappear. And so what I think is absolutely necessary for us is, before the next Move Seattle levy, we need to actually find money in the budget to fulfill all the empty promises that are currently being made. Because if we don't, then I doubt that voters will actually renew a new levy.
Thank you. And I apologize, you cut off at the end, but I believe you were saying that you doubt that voters will actually renew the levy if those promises aren't met. Next, Lance Randall.
Yeah, I agree that the levy fell short of what it was supposed to do. And I think what we have to do is a better job of doing a benefit versus cost analysis of all the transportation projects so that we can evaluate the priorities. And of course, we need to make sure that we do, we have to have more accountable oversight when it comes to our bridges and roads. Apparently, we did not put enough thought in that. And as a result, we have West Seattle, where a whole community is basically cut off from one of the main corridors. So again, with this amount of money, we have to make sure we're prioritizing in such a way that we're taking care of the basic needs when it comes to rehabilitation of roads and bridges, and make sure that we keep the money in place to do exactly what we're supposed to do. So we have to be a better steward of those dollars, because if we want the voters to continue to support such a levy, they need to be able to see that we're doing the things that we said that we were going to do with the money.
Thank you. Casey Sixkiller is next.
Well, I think when it comes to the current levy, obviously it's coming up short. There's a variety of reasons for that. But I do think at a fundamental level, any one of our levies, whether it's housing, education, or this, or library, even libraries, is making sure that we're delivering on the commitments were made and the voters approved. And if that means that in the planning phases it was overly ambitious, then we need to come to terms with that and make sure that we can actually deliver it. Because that does build trust and the opportunity for us to go back to voters and say, look, we accomplished 100% of what we said, and we're ready for the next round. I think looking forward to the next levy, it's just a really exciting time. We finally have the partner in the other Washington and the Biden-Harris administration who actually wants to invest in infrastructure. And as somebody who worked in the other Washington the last time they did that, we did amazing things in Seattle. We replaced the South Park Bridge. We have reconstructed the Mercer Corridor. Now's our opportunity as we look at the next levy to really leverage all these different funding streams to not only replace failing bridges and invest in infrastructure and expand transit, but also be able to complete all those other things like sidewalks in North Seattle and other parts of the city.
Thank you. Next, Colleen Echohawk.
When we think about this levy, we have to think about leadership. And I feel like what we are hearing and what my colleagues have already mentioned is that we didn't get done what we said we'd get done. I think that we need a leader who knows how to look at the project, understand where we're at, and get that work done. I have had that experience in building housing and working with our homeless community to look at a project and understand it, be pragmatic about it, know what the realities are, and get that work done. And if we're not getting it done, then communicating it out to our city, out to our constituents to let them know what is going on with a project. And I commit to you as an Echohawk administration, we'll be communicating clearly about where we are at with these projects. And as we go forward, our levies need to be anchored in the community, focused with a race and social justice lens that we have not had in the past. I'll work with my community partners that I have been working with for years to ensure that we are going to make sure that the next levy is centered on the needs of our BIPOC and other marginalized communities.
Thank you. And finally, Jessen Farrell.
Thank you. So this is a place where city leadership has really failed. I think for folks who are progressive Democrats, we have to show that government is focused on solving problems. And Move Seattle went wrong in, I think, both the planning and the implementation. And this is where a mayor has to be a great administrator and being able to hire, folks who are going to be able to laser-like implementation of what we said we're going to do. So, that is one of the core things that city government absolutely has to be able to do is deliver the promises of levies as well as deliver basic services from other parts of from under other funding streams. And as far as the next levy goes, we have to be laser focused on getting to net zero. It is the hour is very late on climate change, and transportation is the biggest factor in Seattle. And so the next Move Seattle levy has to make great strides in getting us to that goal.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to do a few lightning round questions, and these are yes or no questions, so please try to stick to yes or no answers. The first question, we're going to start with Bruce Harrell. I'm going to call out every candidate's name in order, and then I'd like for you to verbalize your answer for people who are just listening or who are vision impaired. And the first question, yes or no question is, will you update the Seattle Transit Master Plan to codify a citywide exclusive right-of-way light rail plan by the end of 2022? Bruce Harrell.
Yes.
Andrew Grant Houston.
Yes, but we need it in the budget this year.
Lance Randall.
Yes.
Casey Sixkiller.
Yes.
Colleen Echohawk.
Yes.
Jessen Farrell.
Yes.
And Lorena Gonzalez.
Did you hear me?
I didn't. I saw you make a face.
I was gonna do like a dramatic pause and freak you guys out, but the answer is yes.
All right, next question. In 2023, before the Sound Transit 3 environmental impact statement is finalized, will you work with Sound Transit to ensure ST3 is built with future expansion in mind, including adding physical features to the new downtown light rail tunnel that allows future expansion, such as longer platforms and wider platforms. I assume also longer platforms and wide junctions. Don't ask me to explain what that is. That is the question. We will start with Bruce Harrell. That's your job, not mine.
Yes.
Let's go to the order. Andrew Grant Houston.
Yes.
Lance Randall,
Yes.
Casey Six Killer,
Yes, if there's budget.
Colleen Echohawk,
Yes.
Justin Farrell,
Yes.
and Lorena Gonzalez.
Yes.
Will you, as mayor, lobby the state legislature to give Seattle the power to fund more light rail by itself? Bruce Harrell.
Oh, we're gonna serve. Can I get some last position on these yes or no's a little bit? Yes.
But you get it over with quickly and then you're done. Andrew Grant Houston,
Yes.
Lance Randall,
Yes.
Casey Six Killer,
Yes.
Colleen Echohawk,
Yes.
Justin Farrell,
I have been doing that and will continue. Yes.
Lorena Gonzalez.
Ditto.
All right, and last lightning round for now. Do you support redistributing bus service hours to provide more frequent neighborhood service feeding light rail stations instead of our existing one-seat ride focused system? Bruce Harrell,
Yes.
Andrew Grant Houston,
No.
Lance Randall,
Yes.
Casey Six Killer,
Yes.
Colleen Echohawk,
Maybe.
Justin Farrell,
It's complicated. Equity and net zero should be driving our decisions.
Lorena Gonzalez. That was like 10 words. Lorena Gonzalez.
Sorry. Yes, so long as there weren't disproportionate impacts.
All right, now we're going to go back to long form questions. Again, these are 1 minute. And this is a question from the audience. What transit initiatives have you supported in the past and how? Which have you opposed and why? And we'll start with Andrew Grant Houston.
There are so many. Well, I did try to organize through my campaign with Seattle Subway disclosure on the piece of legislation. I want to say it's HB 1377. That would give us the authority to use the monorail to fund light rail. I've also been supporter of ST3 in the past, just within my capacity as an organizer, and also did aim to unsuccessfully get council, before my time on council staff, to increase the STVD sales tax to 2 cents or 0.2%, as opposed to the 1.5 compromise. And we're kind of dealing with those impacts right now, which I think is pretty telling. And that's kind of it.
Great. Lance Randall.
So yeah, I supported the improvements along Rainier Avenue, where we were making bus only lanes. It made it safer, and it also provided ease of mobility for the buses that are coming up and transporting people. So I think it was a good move. I support that. One that I somewhat oppose is these safe streets concern me, because my concern is that if we have first responders that have to get to people, and we have a lot of our streets that are closed for safe streets, I'm concerned about their ability to go to those streets, especially if people are walking those streets, or if they're trying to find another way around to get to where they need to get to respond to someone. So I'm a little concerned about that, these safe streets. I mean, we need to look at doing something different.
Thank you. Next up, Casey Six Killer.
Well, I've been an advocate for high capacity transit in the Seattle region for 20 years, beginning with the implementation of Sound Move, the development of ST2, the implementation of ST3, including, working to secure resources at the federal level to help expand and implement those systems, including the full funding grant agreement with the FTA to expand light rail to University of Washington to Husky Stadium, multiple rapid ride lines across the city of Seattle and beyond, and also creating opportunities to drive more resources into King County Metro, not only to expand service, but also to green its fleet. So I've been a huge proponent of transit for a long time. And I would say, one of the things I'm most proud of is work I did at King County to advance transportation mobility from a racial and social justice perspective, and really focusing on ways that we can break apart transit planning to begin bridging those gaps that we know exist in South Seattle and South County.
Thank you. Colleen Echohawk.
Yeah. Well, some of you who are part of the leadership of Seattle Subway probably remember when I was an ardent, I was against our streetcar. I felt like it was, I didn't, I'll be honest, I did not understand it. And I want to emphasize that. I think that there's a lot of community out there who are not the policy wonks, who are not like deeply involved in this work. And, it was something I just had been reading the headlines and hadn't really understood. And I started to talk to people about it. It was impacting the neighborhood I worked in, Pioneer Square.
Colleen,
Can you hear me?
Colleen, you're breaking up really badly. Yeah. Why can you check your why don't you check the connectivity?
She's not breaking up.
And then I will come back to you and we'll give you a minute again.
Right. Thank you, Erica.
She wasn't breaking up to us though.
Oh, okay. I apologize. Yeah. She's breaking up on my end, which is probably my problem.
Just wanted you to know you're okay, Colleen.
Thanks, Casey.
Well, Colleen, why don't we just in I guess deference to my bad internet connection and my mistake, why don't you start over and we'll okay. Give you that full minute.
Happy to. Thank you. So, 4 or 5 years ago, I was like very much against the streetcar. I was not aware of the impact. And I just want to share that because I think that there are, I come from community who we haven't had the luxury of spending a lot of time reading the policy about transportation. And I was very fortunate to get to know some of the folks who are organizing this, event tonight and got to know a little bit more about the streetcar. And I eventually became a strong proponent of the streetcar. In fact, co-wrote an op-ed in support of the streetcar. And I think that's what leadership is about in this space. It's about learning, expanding, hearing from communities who are most impacted. And what changed my mind is speaking with the folks in the International District who said, Colleen, this was awarded to us. We were told that this was going to be a part of our community. And it was something I was very happy to change my mind out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Justin Farrell.
I have been a passionate advocate for transit my entire life, really. I got my start as a volunteer on the Sound Move campaign, both in 95 and 96. And as a professional, I've worked on 13 out of 15 transit measures, having passed 13 of them from Spokane to Clallam County to Vancouver to Olympia, and of course to Seattle and King County and the region, having led the passage of Sound Transit 2 and helped write the legislation for Sound Transit 3. So this is a huge issue for me, and the public supports transit. I mean, that's the bottom line in rural areas, in urban areas, because the public understands that a great transit system is about freedom and agency. For our most vulnerable users, for the elderly, for young people, for people with special needs, it is fundamentally about getting where you need to go. And a great transportation system has to have a great transit system, and that will absolutely be a priority as mayor.
Lorena Gonzalez.
So, as a council member, I have taken lots of votes on transportation priorities, whether it's protected bike lanes or the Center City Connector. Those are all things that I have been a fervent supporter of. And I've also been a supporter of the city adopting the last mile connections that are provided by the floating bike share and also by our scooter program. So for me, when I became an early adopter and supporter of the Center City Connector, in large part because I had already had conversations before formulating an opinion about that project with members of the Chinatown International District who absolutely were promised that this connection would be made in order to make up for the disproportionate impact created to them because of the First Hill streetcar. So I will continue to support public transit as mayor.
Bruce Harrell.
Yeah, I was trying to think about what I opposed more than what I've supported, because when I look back at whether it's Bridge the Gap levy or setting up the city's transportation district, the Move Seattle levy, all these different levies, Sound Transit 1, 2, and now 3, I've been staunch supporters. And these levies just don't pass on their own, by the way. We've organized telephone banks and we've gone on tours evangelizing the need to pass these sometimes aggressive measures. What I have opposed, I think, when I look back at what I've opposed, number one, Sound Transit 1 was, I thought, fraught with problems. That the record of decision from the federal government basically would have suggested that on the south end of Seattle, it was going to be below grade, much like other areas of the city. So we formed many community committees, and we were able to establish a mitigation fund, which I incorporated as their lawyer and was a community activist. The other portion of the tunnel that we enjoy now, I had grave concerns about the climate impacts of the tunnel construction. So I was somewhat reluctant to jump on the tunnel construction early in the game.
Thank you. Andrew Grant Houston.
I believe it's the first person.
Oh, did I skip anybody? I'm hearing no objections. Moving on. Next question is about equity. How will you ensure that transit improvements are implemented equitably across the city? And if you have time to address this when it comes to public transit service, what does equity mean to you? And we will start with Lance Randall.
Well, like I said, to make sure that we are providing equity across the city as we do our transit improvements, we need to make sure that we are focusing on the communities where they need the construction done the most. There are a lot of communities have historically ignored, and we need to make sure that they are prioritized, and that when we begin to adjust our priorities, we need to look at it through a racial and social justice lens to make sure those communities are first and the repairs are done accordingly. You know, that's basically the way I look at it. I mean, we just have to make those communities priority first.
Casey Sixkiller.
Well, like I referenced just a minute ago, when I was at King County, one of the things we advanced was an equity mobility project. And we learned that, you know, and many folks who are policy wonks know this, that by the time we actually get to an equity analysis, you know, you're already several steps along the process of designing whatever transportation investment you're making. And that's, you know, dictated by federal law, county ordinance, city ordinance, and a bunch of other things. But it doesn't mean that we can't actually go outside that process and center on the communities that we're trying to serve or the issue that we're trying to advance. And that's what we did at King County. Brought community members in, made it super easy for them to participate in that process, and started to break apart institutional barriers to actually advancing transit equity and mobility. And it was a hugely successful effort at King County, especially in South County, and also focused on those critical last mile connections. That's the kind of work that we need to continue to do, is understand the system as it exists today is not really set up to be centered on equity. So we need to be more intentional about making sure it is.
Thank you. Colleen Echohawk.
Yes, we know that some of our systems have really impacted communities of color disproportionately. And that includes some of our transportation systems. So as mayor, I will be asking our city to do a transportation equity assessment that'll conduct a thorough and transparent assessment of all our transportation needs using an equity network and people first lens. This has always been a priority for me in the way that I lead, because I have come from community where we have historically not been heard. I believe that City Hall, an equity lens, and what equity means for me is if we know that communities have been left out, then we are intentional, that we are focused on bringing their voice into City Hall so that they feel that not only they heard, but they are leading the work forward. And I cannot emphasize this enough in this conversation, that our communities of color in our city have been hurt by our transportation systems that have just pushed in and have not heard their voices. And an Echohawk administration will be laser focused on hearing their voices and asking for their leadership.
Justin Farrell.
Thank you for this. I think Equity is fundamentally about rearranging money and power in our city. And I think we are all called to be a part of this. And, you know, I think particularly around transportation, the core questions are who is being asked and who is benefiting. And, you know, one of the most important things is to just go out and listen to what it is that people need and where they are trying to go. When I was at Pierce Transit, we had to do the heartbreaking work of cutting 30% of the service in the last Great Recession. And what that meant, though, is rather than doing a peanut butter approach where every single community takes a little hit, we really prioritized those communities in Pierce County, Tacoma and Lakewood particularly, that relied on transit. And we listened which particular stop got people to their dialysis appointment, which particular stop, which run got people to work. And so fundamentally, it is about planning and co-creating and listening to what it is that people
Justin,
need. I wrapped it up. I figured that was
Awesome.
about a minute.
Yeah, our timer is temporarily offline. I assume it's going to be coming back online momentarily, but I will keep time in the meantime. And next up is Lorena Gonzalez.
Thanks for this important question. You know, I want to take the opportunity to answer this question by lifting up the work of the city's existing transportation equity work group. This is a group of individuals who are part of our community who dedicate their time to lifting up equity in our transportation planning. They've done an amazing job. In fact, Transportation Choices Coalition actually acknowledged
Recording in progress.
that they did with an award in 2019 for the work that they did. And really, I want to be able to empower that group of community leaders who are centering equity in the city's policies, programs, and planning practices to make sure that they have you know, the teeth to be able to implement many of the good recommendations coming out of their transportation equity work group. I don't think we have time to scrap that program and start it from scratch. I think we need to take advantage of the talent that currently exists, and that's what I would intend to do as mayor.
Thank you. Bruce Harrell.
So I would define equity in this context with those who are most in need of transit for work or for school. Make sure they have the best service, the best access to service, whether they need it for work or for school or whatever their needs is, to make sure they have the best. This would be particularly true in underserved communities, BIPOC communities, low-income communities, and make sure their voice is heard. To me, that's the center of transit equity. I would also say that in Sound Transit 3, as an example, where they will talk about, I think they had like 35,000 online comments and thousands of people commenting online about, in another forum, about what their needs are. So as we do the outreach, as these advocate organizations that Lorena spoke of do their work, I think equity can be achieved, but certainly it's an ongoing journey.
And finally, Andrew Grant Houston.
So when I think of equity, when it comes to transportation, it's kind of in two different ways. One is dependent on the mode. I think the biggest one in my mind in Seattle is the fact that we have so many areas of the city where there simply aren't sidewalks. And so we don't actually provide any access whatsoever that can actually truly be safe to get to our transportation, let alone even the nearest corner store that may or may not be there. And so when we start, we actually need to start really from that bottom base level of what are those absolute needs that people have. In addition to that, what I think equity can look like is also allowing for more housing near the transit that we already have, so that in that way we are building on the great systems that we already are using. And in that way, we're allowing for more people to access the existing system, which is successful, while we also work on extending those systems out as well.
All right, and this may be our last long question, and then we'll go to another lightning round. The mayor, and this comes from the audience, the mayor sits on the board of Sound Transit. If not rescued by the state, federal government, or the economy, what is your highest priority for avoiding delay in the Sound Transit 3 realignment process, and why? And we'll start with Casey Sixkiller.
Can you say the question again? That's a long
Yep.
question. So
The mayor sits on the board of Sound Transit. If not rescued by the state, the federal government, or the economy, what is your highest priority for avoiding delays in the Sound Transit 3 realignment process, and why?
well, first, I've been pretty clear. I have concerns about the Sound Transit's realignment process right now. Sound Transit does not have a funding issue. They have a cash flow issue. And I think it's really important that right now, as we look forward to how we're going to accomplish ST3, is that we don't make short-sighted decisions today that we're going to have to live with for the next 3 to 4 decades. So, I really commend Claudia Balducci and others who have, been opening up the books and asking some hard questions about what really is the financial situation of the agency and the ability to actually move these projects forward. I also commend, King County Executive Constantine and others who are looking at ways for us to partner, as I said earlier, with a federal government that wants to expand transit. Look, I know I've been putting these kinds of projects together for a long time. And, even if you look at the Madison BRT line, that's got a great mixture of local resources, Sound Transit resources, federal resources. We even got a $10 million grant just a couple of weeks ago, really underscoring the need to have partnership as we move forward. So I think we have to stick to the ST3 plan. I think we need to better understand the finances and not make short-sighted decisions that we have to live with for a long time.
Thank you. Next is Colleen Echohawk.
Great. Well, the way I understand the question is that what will we prioritize and how will we ensure that we build this out? Because we have to be clear, this is absolutely necessary. This is time for the mayor of Seattle to show leadership. If we care about our climate goals, then we have to do it. There's two things that I think are important here is that we can call for a moratorium on building highways. Let's stop building highways in this state and let's build out transit that works for our community and helps us meet our climate goals that we are woefully behind. It's shameful how far we are behind on our climate goals. And so we have to call for a moratorium on these highways that we continue to build for cars. And secondly, we have opportunity here around parking garages. We're spending a lot of money building parking garages, again, prioritizing cars. And let's, if we cut back on parking garages, we can save almost $1 billion. So that's an opportunity there. Also, I'd be going after the money as hard as possible. Thanks.
Justin Farrell.
So I think we're actually in a moment where we need to be pushing to speed up Sound Transit 3 and get it constructed faster. And that means scrubbing both the cost side of the budget and the revenue projections. It means the mayor has to be a partner with the state legislature in making sure that we are amply funding the regional mobility grants that Sound Transit relies on, and that can help speed up transit. It means area-wide planning and streamlining our planning processes so that we are not delaying time through permitting. And it means being a partner with the federal government as well as our regional. And I have been working on getting big dollars for transportation my entire career. I've helped pass $80 billion in transit, walking, and bicycle infrastructure. So we know how to raise the money. And the moment here is not dreaming small and figuring out how to minimize. It's really going big and speeding it up.
Thanks. Lorena Gonzalez is next.
I have a leaf blower going on in the background, so I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yep, you sound fine to me.
Okay. So listen, the economic impacts are real to Sound Transit. We're talking millions and billions of dollars of impact. So there will need to be a retooling of ST3 to acknowledge the fact that we don't have all the money we thought we were going to have to build on the schedule that we thought we wanted to build on. So I think for me, the priority is making sure that in making those decisions, we are not compromising the ability to build out stations in a way that is truly going to create that multimodal effect that we have all dreamt about and that we all continue to support. In addition, we have to continue to center equity. So making sure that decisions about cutting terminals is not going to disproportionately impact BIPOC communities is critically important.
Thank you. Bruce Harrell.
Well, the highest priority will be to get it passed. I mean, we have to get it passed, and we can't take that for granted. This is a $53 billion package, $30 million in new taxes, an increase in MVET, I think of $80 per $10,000 of worth of a vehicle, property tax about 25%, I think, of 1,000 assessed value. We have to prove to the voters it needs to be passed. And we've got to stop giving the state the ability and the flexibility to build in highways, that in the climate change goals of our state and our world, that is not the end game that we're trying to fight for. So number one, we have to get it passed. Number two is, and I mentioned this in another forum, that I'm creating a cabinet level position to make sure that we have the right leadership in place with my administration to go after the federal dollars, arguing climate change, arguing economic development, and all the benefits of having a robust light rail system. So we will prove to the public that this is a good investment. That will be my
Andrew Grant Houston.
All right, so given that the question was about if we don't get funding from the federal or state government, then how are we going to prioritize things? Priority number one would be to try and push for HB 1304. And I found the right number, so thank you to Twitter for that, which would allow us to self-determine and fund our own system. I think that's the biggest thing for us, is that we know that we lead on so many things, particularly when it comes to transit sustainability. Let us do what we do best. The second thing for me is also thinking about, yes, delaying our decision to change some of our priorities in terms of what may or may not be delayed, but also be conscious of what delays are actually going to cause the system to have to shut down or have significant delays. I believe one of the biggest issues that we're seeing right now, which has been brought up before, were some of the connections to the East Link that cause people not to feel like they can rely on the existing system. And if we are going to be successful in the future and get people to continue to use Link, then they need to be able to rely on it every single day.
And finally, on this one, Lance Randall.
So the priorities that we would have to take a look at is to make sure that whatever is supposed to happen in Seattle itself through this entire project, and my main priority is to make sure that I'm keeping that in the forefront as the member of the board, to make sure that those priorities are not altered or removed. We want to make sure that Seattle, because of the population that we have, that any priorities that need to be adjusted, that they're not taken away from the city of Seattle and what we need to have done. Then we also need to tap into our corporate communities if we have to get them to make donations, which I've said in many cases, to Seattle, so that we can do some of the things ourselves if we can't get rescue from the state or federal government. We have a lot of wealth here, and it's just a matter of helping people understand what the project consists of and the importance of it, and to make those voluntary investments to the municipal government, which they can write off. The IRS basically says you can do that if you make investments for projects like this. So,
so we're going to, we've got 2 minutes left, and I'm going to try to speed through 2 lightning round questions. So these are yes or no. We will start with Colleen and go through the order. Should there be any single family zoning in Seattle? Colleen Echohawk.
Oh, sorry, no.
Justin Farrell.
No.
Lorena Gonzalez.
No.
Bruce Harrell.
Is your question, should there be any single family?
Any single family only zoning?
Yes.
Andrew Grant Houston.
No, as I said since day one.
Lance Randall.
It depends.
Casey Six Killer.
Yes.
Should there be any minimum parking requirements in Seattle zoning code? Colleen Echohawk.
No.
Justin Farrell.
No.
Lorena Gonzalez.
No.
Bruce Harrell.
No.
Andrew Grant Houston.
No.
Lance Randall.
No.
And Casey Six Killer.
Yes.
And then we'll do one more. Do you support putting some resources into reducing bus fares instead of adding service? Colleen Echohawk.
Yes, yes, yes.
Justin Farrell.
Well, all of the above.
Okay, it's neither or question, but next, Lorena Gonzalez.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question because you glitched, but I'm reading now.
Do you support putting some resources into reducing fares instead of adding service?
Yes.
Bruce Harrell,
Yes.
Andrew Grant Houston,
Yes.
Lance Randall,
Yes.
and Casey Sixkiller.
Yes, we're doing it now.
Thank you so much to all of the candidates and to everyone who participated and watched this forum live on all the channels. Ballots will be arriving in your mailboxes next month for the August 3rd election. And now I am going to turn the mic back over to Rachel, who will take us out.
Thank you so much to everyone who joined us, as well as our candidates. It was a good discussion on the future of transit in our city, and just want to let everyone know that the recording of the forum will be available shortly on our YouTube and Facebook pages. And we hope to see everyone at this time next week for our Position 9 forum for City Council. That's Monday, June 28th at 7, and I have the link in the chat. So thank you so much, and everyone enjoy the rest of your evening.